Winston, get everybody up. This ain't pretty out. This is bad. Hurry up, everybody. Get out there.
The weather's not helping out any at all. It's my fault, but we just gotta keep working.
A shocking twist in the icy waves of the Bering Sea has left the Deadliest Catch crew forever changed. While braving the relentless storm, they discovered something they could never have prepared for. A glowing, metallic object like no other floating in the unforgiving waters. What started as a routine mission to haul in crab pots turned into a heart-stopping encounter. Let us delve into the depths of this mystery, where secrets shimmer just below the surface, waiting to rise or pull us under. The Northwestern's discovery. The Bering Sea, wild and unpredictable, is no stranger to danger and drama. It's a vast, icy playground where waves crash against rugged fishing boats and fishermen take on the sea to haul in their prized catch, giant Alaskan king crabs. The crew of the Deadliest Catch knows this life well. They're tough, brave, and used to facing the odds. But one trip changed everything for the crew of the FV Northwestern. What they found wasn't just unexpected, it was downright mind-blowing. As darkness fell, the crew hauled up something that wasn't a crab, something that defied all belief. The day started like any other, cold, windy, and grueling. Captain Sig Hansen and his crew were laser-focused on their mission. Drop the pots, pull them up, and repeat until they hit the jackpot. Hours blurred into each other, the crew working through exhaustion and icy winds. Then, out of nowhere, something odd caught their eye. A strange light flickered on the horizon. At first, they thought it was nothing. Maybe it was a ship's signal or some trick of the light. The Northern Lights can play all sorts of games with your eyes out here. But this wasn't the usual shimmer of green and purple in the sky. This light was steady, growing brighter by the second. It hovered above the waves, not moving like a boat would. It didn't take long for curiosity to take over. With the Northwestern cutting through the icy waters, the crew moved closer to the source. As they approached, the light turned into something else entirely. There, floating partially submerged in the freezing sea, was a metallic object. It wasn't just some piece of floating junk or shipwreck debris. This thing looked different. Its surface was smooth, almost glowing, and it had strange patterns etched into it, like a code or a language no one could read. Once on deck, the object started humming. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the hair on the back of their necks stand up. Even stranger, it felt warm to the touch, despite the freezing air. The crew couldn't stop staring at the intricate designs covering its surface. Some thought it might be a piece of advanced tech, maybe military. Others whispered about aliens, half joking but also half serious. The atmosphere on the boat shifted. The crew, seasoned and tough, started feeling uneasy. The hum of the object seemed to vibrate through the entire boat. A few crew members even said they felt a tingling sensation like a low electric shock running through them. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't normal. Captain Hansen, always the steady hand, decided it was time to call for backup. He contacted the Coast Guard, explaining what they'd found. The response wasn't what he expected. There was a long silence on the other end before they were told to stay put and wait for further instructions. That's when the tension really started to build. Hours passed. The crew tried to distract themselves by going back to work, but it was no use. The strange object had them all on edge. Some said they could hear faint whispers coming from it, though others brushed it off as stress or exhaustion playing tricks. When the Coast Guard finally showed up, things got even weirder. For the crew, the experience was unforgettable. They had seen their fair share of strange things on the Bering Sea, weird creatures, sunken ships, even ghost stories. But this was on another level. It wasn't just a story to tell over beers, it was something that shook them to their core. Even as they returned to their usual grind, the memory of that glowing object stayed with them. They couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been part of something bigger, something they couldn't fully understand. And while the Coast Guard might have taken the object, the mystery of what it was and why it was there remained. Theories snowballed, each one wilder than the last. Some suggested it might have been a piece of alien spacecraft, somehow ending up in the icy waters of the Bering Sea. Others thought it could be an ancient artifact, a relic of a civilization lost to time. The designs etched into its surface became the focus of heated debates. Researchers and amateur sleuths alike tried to decode them, though no one came close to understanding their meaning. The hum of the object, too, became a topic of fascination. Those who had been on the Northwestern that day described it as more than just a sound. It was something you felt deep in your chest, like a vibration that resonated with your very being. Some said it was soothing, almost hypnotic, while others found it unnerving, as though it was probing their thoughts. The Bering Sea, already a place of extremes, now seemed even more enigmatic. The icy waters, the crashing waves, and the ever-present danger of the job all seemed small in comparison to what they had encountered. It was a humbling reminder of how much of the world remains unexplored and how little humans truly understand about their own planet. Despite the warnings from the Coast Guard, bits and pieces of the story continued to slip out. The fishing community buzzed with rumors, and the Northwestern's crew found themselves fielding questions they couldn't answer. They had seen something incredible, something that defied explanation, and yet they were left in the dark just like everyone else. The impact of that day rippled far beyond the Northwestern. Scientists and researchers took an interest in the story, though the lack of tangible evidence made it difficult to study. Conspiracy theorists had a field day, weaving the event into their narratives about government cover-ups and alien encounters. Even those who didn't believe in such things couldn't help but be intrigued by the mystery. The Deadliest Catch itself took on a new level of excitement. Fans tuned in not just for the usual drama of the crab fishing season, but for any hints or updates about the strange object. The story became a part of the show's mythology, a tale that blurred the lines between reality and fiction. It was a reminder that even in the most rugged, down-to-earth professions, the world can still surprise us in ways we never imagined. For those who heard the story, it was a reminder of how vast and unpredictable the world truly is. The Bering Sea, with its icy waves and relentless storms, had revealed one of its secrets, only to shroud it in even greater mystery. And for the crew of the Northwestern, it was a moment that would forever set their journey apart from all the others. Whatever the truth behind the object, one thing was clear. The sea, like the universe, still holds secrets beyond our wildest imaginations. The crew thought it was just another trip until something unusual changed everything. A haul to remember. As weeks turned into months, the mystery deepened. Scientists continued their research, publishing papers and sharing their findings with the world. Theories about the object's origin became more elaborate. Some suggested it was a fragment of a long-lost civilization, evidence of advanced technology that predates recorded history. Others speculated it was extraterrestrial, a piece of a spacecraft that had fallen to Earth and been hidden beneath the waves for centuries. Despite the excitement, there were no definitive answers. The object remained in mystery, a puzzle that refused to be solved. For the crew of the Deadliest Catch, it was a constant reminder of the ocean's secrets. They'd always known the sea was unpredictable, but this discovery had shown them just how little they truly understood. The return trips to the fishing grounds were different now. The crew worked with the same efficiency, the same determination, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation in the air. Each time they set out, they couldn't help but wonder if they'd find something else, another piece of the puzzle that was the glowing object. The ocean, as always, kept its secrets close. Fishing is a tough business, demanding physical strength, mental fortitude, and a willingness to face danger head-on. The crew knew this all too well. Their days were long, their nights often sleepless, and the cold was relentless. But they also knew the rewards, the satisfaction of a full hold, the pride of a job well done, and the knowledge that they were part of a tradition that stretched back generations.
That's pretty good. That's some big pots.
Oh my God. I'm counting it. Woo!
The glowing object had added a new layer to their lives. It was a story they'd tell for years to come, a moment that had set them apart from every other fishing crew on the Bering Sea. It was a reminder that even in a world as harsh and unforgiving as the ocean, there's still room for wonder, curiosity, and discovery. As they prepared for another season, the crew couldn't help but think about what the future might hold. The sea is vast, its depths largely unexplored. Who knows what else might be down there, waiting to be found? The glowing object was just one mystery in a world full of them, a small piece of a much larger puzzle. And for the crew of the Deadliest Catch, that was enough to keep them coming back, season after season, ready to face whatever the ocean decided to throw their way. The fishermen of the Bering Sea were no strangers to the extraordinary. Every trip out to sea came with its own dose of chaos. Crabs that wouldn't bite, waves taller than their boats, and the constant fight against the freezing wind. But this time, they brought back something that left even the hardiest of them scratching their heads. It started like any other haul. The pots were heavy, the crew was grumbling, and the crabs were plentiful. But as they emptied one particular pot, something clattered onto the deck that wasn't a crustacean. It was a chunk of metal, smooth and polished, with strange symbols etched all over its surface. Nobody knew what to make of it, but everyone knew one thing: it didn't belong there. By the time they docked back at Dutch Harbor, the story had already started spreading. The Deadliest Catch crew found something weird, people whispered at the docks. The crew was tired but restless, their minds spinning with what they'd pulled up. It wasn't treasure, not in the gold and silver sense, but it felt important. Captain Jonathan made the call to keep the object under wraps, at least for now. It was stashed away in the shipyard, covered with a tarp and guarded from curious eyes. But secrecy only added fuel to the fire. Locals, reporters, and even rival fishermen swarmed Dutch Harbor, desperate to get a glimpse. Theories ran wild. Some claimed it was part of an old shipwreck, maybe a relic from a long-lost voyage. Others said it had fallen from space, a piece of a satellite, or the more imaginative, a UFO. The symbols on the object were unlike anything anyone had seen before. They weren't letters, not in any language the experts knew. They weren't random scratches either. They looked deliberate, as if they were meant to tell a story. As the days passed, the unease among the crew grew. They couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled onto something that should have stayed hidden. The object seemed almost alive, like it was watching them, waiting. Nights at the shipyard grew eerier, the strange artifact casting long, unexplainable shadows under the dim lights. One night, as a storm battered Dutch Harbor, Captain Jonathan found himself drawn back to the shipyard. Rain pelted his jacket as he pulled the tarp off the object, running his fingers over the smooth, glowing surface. The markings seemed to shift under his touch, almost like they were trying to speak to him. He stood there for what felt like hours, the howling wind around him fading into the background. The rest of the crew wasn't faring much better. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it brought strange dreams. Images of endless oceans, towering waves, and those same glowing symbols. They couldn't escape it, not on land, not at sea. The object had wormed its way into their minds. Experts were called in. Scientists, historians, even a self-proclaimed paranormal investigator. Each had their own theory, but none could explain the object's origin. The symbols didn't match any known language. The metal wasn't like anything found on Earth. And then there was the weight of it, far heavier than it looked, almost as if it were holding a piece of the sea itself. Theories turned from curious to outright bizarre. Was it a message from another world? A piece of technology from an ancient, advanced civilization? Or just some odd, man-made object that ended up in the wrong place? The lack of answers only deepened the mystery. Some of the crew started to regret bringing it aboard. "Maybe we should have just left it down there," one of them muttered during a rare quiet moment at the local bar. The others nodded, sipping their drinks in uneasy silence. The ocean was vast and full of secrets. Maybe this was one they weren't meant to uncover, but curiosity had a way of digging in. Despite their reservations, the crew couldn't leave it alone. They made trips to the shipyard, running their hands over the strange object, hoping for some kind of answer. Instead, they got more questions. The object started changing, its glow growing brighter, its surface warmer to the touch. It felt alive. Then one day, a stranger arrived in Dutch Harbor. He wasn't a fisherman. His clean suit and polished shoes made that clear. He introduced himself as an investigator, someone who specialized in unusual finds. Word had spread farther than they'd thought, and now outsiders were coming to see for themselves. Captain Jonathan was reluctant, but eventually agreed to show him the object. The investigator's face remained neutral as he studied it, taking notes and muttering under his breath. When he finally left, he offered no answers, only a cryptic promise to be in touch. His visit left the crew even more uneasy. What did he know that he wasn't sharing? Life seemed to return to normal, but the crew knew this was far from over. Secrets of the Bering Sea. After that, things only got stranger. people started watching the shipyard, locals, reporters, and a few faces that didn't belong to either group. The crew began to feel like they were being followed, their every move scrutinized. The object had become a magnet for attention, and not all of it was welcome. Weeks turned into months, and the crew's lives never quite returned to normal. They went back to fishing, but the object was always in the back of their minds. It was a weight, an unanswered question they couldn't shake. And deep down, they all knew one thing: whatever it wasn't finished with them. The sea had given them a mystery, and mysteries have a way of demanding answers. Whether they liked it or not, the fishermen of the Deadliest Catch were now part of a story far bigger than they'd ever imagined. Each new trip to sea felt different, weighed down by what they'd left back at Dutch Harbor. The rhythm of their work, the cranking of the winches, the sloshing of seawater on the deck felt less familiar, as if the ocean itself had shifted. They tried to focus, pulling up pots and sorting crabs, but their minds always drifted back to the object. Jonathan especially couldn't let it go. Every night he found himself returning to the shipyard, standing in the quiet darkness, staring at the strange artifact. He noticed changes, subtle shifts in the glow, new patterns emerging on its surface. It felt like the object was trying to communicate, though he couldn't begin to guess what it was saying. The crew started to notice changes in themselves too. Little things at first: a heightened awareness, sharper senses, an uncanny ability to predict the weather or the movements of the sea. Then came the dreams, vivid and unrelenting, of places they'd never seen and creatures they couldn't name. They stopped talking about it openly, afraid of what it might mean, but the tension among them was palpable. Dutch Harbor began to change as well. The town felt more crowded, more watched. Strangers appeared more frequently, some openly asking questions about the object, others lurking in the shadows. The crew's family started to notice too, asking why reporters were hanging around their homes, why men in suits were parked down the street. One evening, as Jonathan walked to the shipyard, he saw headlights in the distance. A black car idled near the fence, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. He hesitated but continued on, pulling the tarp off the object and running his hand over its surface. The glow was stronger now, pulsing faintly under his touch. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting someone to approach, but the car stayed where it was. The next day, the car was gone, but new rumors had started spreading. Some said the government was involved, that they wanted to take the object for themselves. Others claimed it was cursed, that the crew had brought something back that would doom them all. Jonathan dismissed the rumors, but the weight of them lingered. The object's changes became more pronounced. It began to emit a faint hum, barely audible but impossible to ignore. The glow grew brighter at night, casting eerie patterns on the walls of the shipyard. The crew's unease turned to fear, but they couldn't bring themselves to get rid of it. It felt like it belonged to them now, like they were meant to guard it. As the weeks stretched on, Jonathan made a decision. He called a meeting with the crew, laying everything out on the table. They needed answers, and they couldn't wait for someone else to provide them. They would take the object back out to sea, back to where they'd found it, and see if the ocean held any clues. The day they set out was clear and cold, the kind of weather that sharpened the senses. The crew worked silently, their movements purposeful. The object was secured on deck, glowing faintly under the sunlight. Jonathan stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't know what they would find, but he felt a strange sense of purpose, as if they were finally on the right path. When they reached the spot where they'd found the object, the sea was unnaturally calm. The crew lowered it over the side, watching as it disappeared into the depths. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water began to churn, glowing faintly where the object had sunk. The crew stared, transfixed, as a column of light shot up from the ocean, illuminating the night sky. The light was blinding, and the hum they'd heard before grew louder, resonating through the boat. Jonathan felt his heart race as the symbols from the object appeared in the light, spinning and shifting, forming patterns that seemed to speak directly to him. He couldn't understand the message, but he felt it, a deep, primal connection to something far greater than himself. When the light finally faded, the sea was calm again. The object was gone, and the crew stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. Jonathan turned to his crew, seeing the same awe and fear reflected in their eyes. Whatever had just happened, it had changed them. They were no longer just fishermen, they were part of something much larger. The journey back to Dutch Harbor was quiet. The crew spoke little, each lost in their thoughts. When they docked, the town was waiting, eager for answers, but the crew had none to give. The object was gone, but its impact lingered, etched into their minds and hearts. As the weeks turned to months, the crew tried to return to normal, but the experience had left its mark. They couldn't forget the light, the symbols, the feeling of connection. The ocean was no longer just a place of work. It was a place of mystery, a reminder of how much they didn't know. Jonathan found himself returning to the spot where they'd left the object, staring out at the water and wondering what it all meant. He knew they'd been part of something extraordinary, something they might never fully understand, and though the object was gone, its presence remained, a quiet reminder of the secrets the sea still held. The fishermen of the Bering Sea had always been resilient, but now they carried with them a deeper understanding of the world's mysteries. They had faced the unknown and returned, forever changed by what they had seen. And as they continued their work, pulling crabs from the depths, they couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the ocean might reveal. It started like any other day on the frigid waters of the Bering Sea. The fishermen, rugged and worn from years of battling waves and hauling nets, weren't expecting anything out of the ordinary. They were out to catch crab, not make history. But as fate would have it, the sea had a surprise waiting for them, something that would flip their world upside down. The crew was curious, but also wary. They hauled it onto the deck, careful not to damage their equipment or themselves. The thing was smooth and cold to the touch, with faint grooves and symbols etched across its surface. It didn't look man-made, at least not by any man they'd ever known. They stood there staring, unsure of what to do next. Jonathan, the captain, decided they couldn't just leave it behind. He made the call to bring it back to the shipyard. It felt important, like they'd stumbled onto something that shouldn't be ignored. And big it was, maybe too big. They didn't know it yet, but their lives were about to take a turn they never signed up for. When they docked, the shipyard seemed eerily quiet, but it didn't stay that way for long. Soon, dark cars started showing up, parking across the street like vultures circling a carcass. Men in suits watched from a distance, pretending to be inconspicuous, but failing miserably. The crew noticed, and unease settled over them like a heavy fog. It felt like they were being watched, like someone was keeping tabs on them, and not in a friendly way. Jonathan's gut told him they'd messed with something they shouldn't have. He couldn't help but wonder if they should have just left the object where they found it, deep beneath the waves. But it was too late now. The thing was out of the ocean and sitting right there, drawing attention they didn't want. The crew tried to go about their business, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was like a shadow that clung to them no matter where they went. As days passed, the strange object became harder to ignore. It wasn't just a curiosity anymore, it was a problem. The crew argued about what to do. Some wanted to get rid of it, to dump it back into the sea and wash their hands of the whole mess. Others felt like they had a duty to figure out what it was, to see this through to the end. After all, they'd pulled it from the deep. Wasn't it their responsibility to uncover its secrets? The days that followed were tense. The crew stuck to themselves, keeping the object hidden and avoiding unnecessary attention. Yet the sensation of being watched never went away. It gnawed at their nerves, a persistent unease that made even the bravest among them jump at shadows. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound outside their windows felt like a threat. The next day, a team arrived. They didn't waste any time. They loaded the object onto a truck and drove off without so much as a hint of where they were taking it. The crew watched in silence as it disappeared down the road, a mix of relief and regret washing over them. They'd been part of something extraordinary, something that would stick with them forever, but now it was out of their hands. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could get after something like that. The crew went back to fishing, back to the sea they knew so well, but the memory of the object lingered. Late at night, under the stars, they'd talk about it, wondering where it came from, what it was, and what would happen to it now. They knew they'd probably never get the answers they wanted, but they also knew they'd been part of something special. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Who decides what secrets stay hidden and who gets to uncover the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.